now like to present our speaker this evening, Norfolk County Registry of Deeds, Mr. William O'Donnell. Mr. O'Donnell's subject this evening will be the 4 presidents of the United States who were born in Norfolk County. And so, Mr. O'Donnell, it's over to you.
Well, Jim, thank you very much, and to all, thank you for having me. My name's Bill O'Donnell. I grew up in Norwood, up the street. Went to school at Xaverian Brothers High School after going to Wald School in St. Catherine's in Norwood, and then left to go to Georgetown University, where I always had an interest in history, but studied American government and economics, and then came back for law school at Boston College. And one of the things I like about my position as Registrar of Deeds, it sort of combines a lot of passions I have. I was an assistant district attorney here in Norfolk County, and then best job I ever had, except at the first of the month when the mortgage was due, and my boss gave me great advice. He says, you've got a family, you might want to go out and get in the private sector. So in the private sector, I loved being a lawyer. I loved litigation. I loved everything about being an attorney. And this job combines both because, yes, I'm here to talk a little bit about history, but I'm also recognize that the Registry of Deeds kind of intersects history with politics that I learned down in Washington, D.C. Had the privilege of working for Joe Moakley for 3 years, Congressman Moakley. But also being in the private sector and also being an attorney. So it's great to come here tonight because I want to talk about the registry a little bit and then also talk about some of the history that you can find in the records, including the 4 presidents of the United States that were born here in Norfolk County. Sometimes when I start these lectures or speeches, I mention I'm not good at telling jokes or singing songs, but we have trivia, and I say, who are the 4 presidents born in Norfolk County? But the answers are right in front of you with these poster boards, so I won't get into that, and I'll get into it a little later, but yes, Norfolk County, I don't think there's another county in the United States, possibly in Virginia, that can say that 3 presidents were born here in Norfolk County. It was John Adams, John Quincy Adams. A lot of people get John Kennedy, even though sometimes they don't realize Brookline's part of Norfolk County, the way the history went there, and people say, wow, Brookline's separate from the county. But you have to realize back in 1793 when Norfolk County started, South Boston, Dorchester, Roxbury, Hyde Park, Reedville were all part of Norfolk County. So Brookline was actually, it was all contiguous. Some of those areas got annexed into Boston, but Brookline chose to stay as part of Norfolk County. So that's another piece of trivia is how did Brookline get separate, and that's why. And the 4th president of the United States that was born in Norfolk County is George Herbert Walker Bush, and a lot of people, that's usually the one that stumps people, and we'll get into that in a little bit. I want to thank Lauren Vitat for inviting me here and making all the arrangements. When I said to Lauren, as I said to you, I don't tell great jokes. I'm not good singing, and why do you want me to speak? And she said she was desperate for a speaker, so that's why you got stuck with me tonight. It's great to talk a little bit about history, but I do want to just touch upon the Registry of Deeds on the here and now. And you may find the information useful, but you may have relatives or people that you can bring the information back. First of all, we have this green folder that was handed out, and it does have a lot of great information. I'm not going to get into all of it, but when you think about it, the Registry of Deeds, yes, we're here to talk about history, but the biggest asset most of us have are our homes, and that's what the Registry of Deeds is about. So there's information in this green folder about the homestead. And again, a lot of this is on our website too. When I started as a register, and time goes by, I became register in 2002. Whether you realize it or not, they didn't even have email there. you know, and the internet was just starting. So all these changes that have taken place in 20 years, just in your life, you can kind of envision it and all the technology. But I can say, go to our website, www.norfolkdeeds.org. But that wasn't the case, you know, back in 2002 as things were moving forward. So our website is a source of information, and we do it the old-fashioned way. We still, you know, put it in the folder for people to read. And that's sort of the approach I've taken to the registry. Not to digress, we've been at the cutting edge. We have implemented so many modernization initiatives. I mentioned the website, but I'm very proud of, and again, there's no I in team, my staff, I've got a great staff that helped in this endeavor. Very proud that we implemented internet land record research. Again, something that really wasn't around in 2002, but as we went forward with the internet and saw what it was about, and it didn't happen overnight, because as I mentioned, Norfolk County goes back to 1793. All those records are online. So if you want to do research, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, you can go to the website, www.norfolkdeeds.org, and look it all up. It's available on the internet, and you're going to see by some of the handouts, some of the older records are handwritten, but we've transcribed those documents. So you can hit one button to get the legal document, which is the handwritten document, and you can hit another button to get the transcribed version. And I think that's not just important for the lawyers. You know, the lawyers love it, but more and more we're seeing people that are doing historical and genealogical research and looking up information on who was at their home or the history of their home. I think that's a good resource for people to have. And when I say I'm very proud of other modernization initiatives, whether it's electronic recording, getting all those documents online. When I first got to the registry, I asked, well, how do you back all this up? What's the disaster recovery? And the person pulled out a thing on the desk and said, it's all there. It's all backed up now. Everyone, you know, the records to your home, and let's face it, I mentioned it, the biggest asset most of us have in our homes, those records are backed up. They're not only backed up by microfilm, which you might say, well, it's an old-fashioned way of doing things, but by law, we have to do it. It's in the statute, we have to microfilm. But think about it. Down in New Orleans, and they're talking about a hurricane coming to Florida, but think about back in New Orleans, a flood came in, and they wiped out a lot of the repositories for records, and they were all wiped out. But at least we have, you know, here in Norfolk County, we'd have, you know, it's on microfilm, that's kind of old-fashioned, but every day we do a tape drive backup that gets sent to a renovated nuclear bunker owned by Iron Mountain. So some of our records are in Iron Mountain in New York, in Massachusetts, and down in Rhode Island. So we've taken steps to run it like a business. As I said, I was in the private sector, but and be modern about it. You know, the modernization initiatives that have taken place here in Norfolk County have made Norfolk Registry of Deeds one of the best. I think the attorneys will tell you that. Attorneys have written how Norfolk County is one of the best, but I still try to do it the old-fashioned way. We're still one of the few registries that print books. And people say, well, that's so old-fashioned. Well, you know, if the computers go down and we have backups, you know, people still know how to do it the old-fashioned way. We print the index, we print the books, and a lot of times people come in to do the research the old-fashioned way. And to give you a sense, we're overbooked 40,000. There's 40,000 books. That's just on the recorded land side of the Registry of Deeds. Another avenue of research is the land court, which started in Norfolk County in 1900, and there's over 1.5 million documents on that side. So there's a lot of information, a lot of history that's available. Just a couple of consumer issues before we get into some of the history that's there. Homestead. If you own a home and you're lucky enough to own a home, you should consider getting a homestead. It's in the state legislature in Chapter 188 that people who own a piece of property as their principal residence can take steps to protect the property against a forced sale. Yes, if you don't pay the town of Foxborough your taxes, they can take the property by tax title. If you don't pay your lender, they can foreclose on you. But there's other situations people get themselves in. They could have a bad car accident where they thought they had a lot of insurance, but they only had $20,000 worth of insurance on their car, and they have a $100,000 case because they hurt somebody and they're liable. Well, the homestead puts a picket fence around the house. They're still going to chase you, but they can't force the sale of your home. And I think it's very important to, it's again, on the website, it's in the green folder that's there. And again, if you're elderly, there's certain protections for the elderly that are there. There are certain protections that are written in by the state legislature. Why would they write them in unless they want people to take advantage of it? For instance, if you have a homestead recorded at the registry and your house burnt down and you got a check, an insurance check to rebuild, you're protected for 2 years so that the insurance proceeds are protected so your creditors cannot come in and swoop in and go after the money. If you go to sell your house, again, the proceeds of the sale are protected for 1 year if you have a homestead recorded. So there's a, you know, I mentioned I was an attorney. You talk to attorneys, I know we have a bad name, but if you talk to 10 different attorneys, I would say 9.9 out of 10 would tell people to have a homestead. And if you have younger folks, if you're lucky enough at 18 to own a house, you have a right to put a homestead on. So even though the legislature has written in extra protections for elderly, I tell everyone, if you're young, middle-aged, elderly, you should really get a homestead. So that's one consumer issue just to pass on for the here and now as opposed to the history we're about to talk. Many of you had to borrow money. I know I did. I have 3 children, so you know you've got obligations. My daughter just got married. You got, you know, you're trying to get through college. We borrow money. Well, when you borrow money, a mortgage gets recorded at the registry when you borrow that money, and that's to make sure that the bank, and you have a lot of good, great community banks here in Foxborough. They want to get paid, and sometimes we have to refinance. You know, when rates were 2.5, you refinance. My goodness, I heard it's over 7% now. So when you refinance, your old mortgage was paid off, or maybe you were lucky enough to have your mortgage paid off, and I'm jealous and I congratulate you. But you want to make sure the mortgage discharge gets recorded at the registry. And what's a mortgage discharge? It's a 1- or 2-page document that tells the world that the mortgage has been paid off. And the reason why I mention it is, and things have gotten better. The Attorney General, there was litigation more against the bigger banks who were kind of lax in making sure people's mortgage discharges got sent to the registry. Other times, it might have been sent to you and it just wasn't made clear. You have to take that to the registry to get recorded. Now, again, I'm a big believer in community banking. There's I'm from Norwood Bank, a great community bank, a lot of great community banks all around Norfolk County. If you have an issue and you need a mortgage discharge, you go to your local bank and say, hey, I paid off that mortgage and I'm trying to sell my house or I'm trying to refinance, and the closing attorney is saying I need a mortgage discharge. I know I paid it off. They're great. You'll go in, they'll look it up, they'll get you a mortgage discharge, and you just got to get it to the registry. The thing is, a lot of times back when, a while ago, you might have borrowed money from these bigger banks, and they're less consumer friendly, in my opinion. Sometimes those banks assign your mortgage a couple of times, and believe it or not, in Massachusetts, there's no law that requires an assignment to be recorded at the registry so consumers can know who holds their mortgage. And the reason I mention it is if you're chasing a mortgage, sometimes it's hard to chase that paper. Local bank, community bank, easier, but some of the bigger banks, no. And the only reason I say that is every time I do a talk, someone grabs me afterwards and says, I could tell people were glazing over when you were talking about that mortgage discharge. But I went through that, and I wish someone had told me about getting on the mortgage discharge getting recorded, because they had a tough time tracking it down. So again, we have information on it, and I just mention it because we all have to borrow money. It's just when that mortgage gets paid off or you refinance, which means the old mortgage got paid off, make sure the mortgage discharge is recorded. Another consumer issue, before I get into the history, consumer notification service. FBI says the fastest growing white collar crime is property fraud, mortgage fraud. Now, we have a program, and we did this before you hear the TV title lock and all this. We did this a while ago as a service. And again, it's a reflection of us trying to be a modern operation with technological abilities and information technology services. Our consumer notification service, you can sign up online. What is the consumer notification service? You sign up. I've signed up myself, and I get emails. If my name is William Patrick O'Donnell, but I get a notice of any William O'Donnell document that gets recorded at that registry. Now, I get the, and again, if you're not good on the computer, we have a customer service center, and their number is 781-461-6101. You can call them and get some help. But I'll get an email, and I will look it up. And it may be William J. O'Donnell, has nothing to do with me, fine. Could be William T. O'Donnell, but it sends me these notices. But there will be a time, hopefully never, but it could, where I'm going to look at that document and say, wait a minute, that's the deed to my house. I did not sign that. Or that's a mortgage on my property, but I didn't sign that. And again, I want to be clear. The Consumer Notification Service at the Registry of Deeds does not prevent the crime. But we do have links, we do have that we can give you to the law enforcement agencies that you can get in touch, and you may want to get in touch with an attorney if you're in that situation, because obviously you haven't prevented the fraud, but you want to get on that right away. And why did we do it? Well, we did it because my parents, my dad was climbed poles for the Boston Edison for 38 years. He was from Brighton. My mom was from Rosendale. When they bought the house in Norwood in 1959, you think they were looking at their records, or certainly homesteads were available back then. They didn't have a homestead on because no one conveyed this information to people. You were lucky to get that information, but now with the internet and things like that, people are more attuned to ways they can protect themselves. But the reason why I mentioned my parents is they weren't watching the records. You bought your house, and then, if you were lucky enough to live in it, for 40 years and sell it, you went back to the registry with the deed and you sold it. But there are predators out there, and that's the society we live in. So we came up with this, we did this consumer notification service so people could get notified if there was any activity that involved their name. Now, we did that a while ago. Now suddenly you have title lock, all that. Well, in Norfolk County it's free. So you just sign up and you can do it. So that's another, again, I know I'm here to talk history, but sometimes it's good to have the information of the here and now. And I think, again, that's the FBI talking. And certainly I think it's gotten worse as far, and we all hear about it, cybersecurity, breaches, scams, and believe me, real estate is a big target of that. As far as history, and you're all, you're members of the Foxborough Historical Society, so history is probably a passion for you as it is for me. I think it's important that these records, and again, we have a modern registry that goes back to 1793. All those records are available. And I think it's important to realize that for people who are interested in history, you can go back on these records. You can look up these records. So the Modernization Initiative has opened the doors for historical research. And one of the other things I was very proud of, it was great to get all these documents on. Oh, and the other thing is, sometimes when we first started, we would just scan the images in. But now it's integrated. So what does that mean? Well, if you run a name, if you run your name, every record back to, to 1793 comes up. So if you run John Adams's name, it's integrated. It will populate, if you do the research, all the records in John Adams's name. And, again, we have information, and it's in the book. There's a book we did. We did two books. In one, this was for the 225th anniversary of Norfolk County, which started in 1793. And it does have information about the four presidents. But I think it's just great reading the records. And one of the other projects, so we're very proud that we're back to 1793 in all those documents. Over 45 million images are available to you by just going online. It's integrated, so our index is integrated to the document. So if you run John Adams, all the records of John Adams back to 1793 come up. So it's an integrated name index with the documents. And the other thing, you know, I'm the 11th register. From 1793 to 1900, someone with the best penmanship was the person that wrote the documents. They didn't have copy machines, so someone would come in and actually, sometimes I'm all over the place on these things, but book 1, page 1, if you look it up, it's a document from Foxborough. The first document, now, like Don's on Marblehead here when I'm talking to Foxborough. The first document ever recorded in Norfolk County's history was a document from Foxborough. So we're very proud that you can do that. You can integrate an index. You can look up this information. But back in 1793, when that document got written in by horseback or whatever, there was probably someone with the best penmanship would transcribe the document. So the original document would come in and they would write it in the book. Well, the documents from 1793 to 1900 were all handwritten. So, you know, and those are the legal documents. But we undertook a project. It finished a few years ago. So from 1793 to 1900, there was over 450,000 documents in that range. Every one of those documents got transcribed. We started with the deeds because we felt, you know, I'm a history person. I think most people would be interested in the deeds. But then we extended it to every document that got recorded from 1793 to 1900. You can now look up as transcribed. And, you know, I'm just, I don't want to be like the teacher in school or anything like that. Actually, I'll hand a few more up. I'll get some more. And again, maybe I'm doing it because you people probably know more about the Adamses than I do. But the reason I'm showing this is to show you. And some of these, this particular one is not in the folder, but we do have other references in the folder. But the reason I point it out is there's handwritten documents or transcribed, and you'll see it for 2 pages, and then you'll see the written one. This is the same exact document. And the reason why I mentioned this one was actually John Adams, who again was the President of the United States. He donated this land to the town of Quincy, which is the big city now, but it was the town of Quincy. And again, some of the writings, if you go, to the 3rd line, I feel for the residents of my ancestors. On the 4th line, I bear the inhabitants with whom I have so happily lived for more than 86 years, and of my sincere desire to promote their happiness and the instruction of their prosperity in religion, morality, and all useful unto and sciences. And just some of the language that gets written into these documents. Further down, and it's interesting, he says, almost towards the end, and next, after the completion of said temple, he was donating this land so a church could be built, that all the future rents, profits, and emoluments arising from said land be applied to the support of a school for the teaching of the Greek and Latin languages and any other languages, arts, and science, which a majority of the ministers, magistrates, lawyers, and physicians inhabiting in said town may advise. And the reason why I mention that is there's another donation of land that John Adams did to the town of Quincy, and he did it in honor of his friend John Hancock. Now, John Hancock was the first governor of Massachusetts. He was the president of the Continental Congress. And in that document, John Adams, who's the 2nd president of the United States, writes about John Hancock and what a great patriot he was and all the things he did. And it's funny, he also mentions even more strongly that he thinks everyone should take Latin and Greek. Maybe he'd be disappointed on how things are now, but I was always amazed about John Adams because David McCulloch David McCulloch, I've always enjoyed his books. I've met him, and as a matter of fact, on the back, there's a green book. This is another history book we did, volume 2. This was done when the building was rededicated in 2019, and we did a rededication. But on the back page, and I was very proud. David McCulloch actually wrote me a letter where he mentions, I was fascinated and delighted to learn about the way the Norfolk County Registry of Deeds and the Xerox Corporation are transcribing the historical deeds into easy-to-read computer text. And I say this as one who has spent a great deal of my working life struggling to read original letters and diaries and other old documents. You are making an important contribution, and I send my warmest congratulations. David McCulloch, American historian and author, who recently passed away. But what I was amazed, maybe John Adams got it wrong with Latin and Greek, but he predicted, although he said it was going to be on July 2nd, everyone would be celebrating the independence, and he said with pomp and circumstance and parades and bonfires and fireworks. And I'm like, how does someone predict that? And look where, when July 4th, all you have to be is around here and say that. How does someone have the vision to see that? And John Adams had written that in his diary. So, and certainly, and you can read about what he does. And it's certainly in the books, and also in the green sheet we brought some handouts on some of the presidents and what they did. And I know I digress, but the transcription is what David McCulloch was talking about. And those transcribed documents, one of the reasons I did it was history can't possibly come alive if you can't read the document. And if you look at that, I mean, you can read it. It's tough. It's a tough slog, as they say. And I mentioned earlier, I went to St. Catherine's, so we at least got drilled on cursive. I'm not so sure society, a lot of people, especially the younger generation, knows cursive. And so what I'm saying is that may be a foreign, this language may be a foreign language because no one knows how to read cursive, or it's going a different way. So for history to be preserved and for history to come alive, there were a lot of reasons we wanted to transcribe these documents. And again, it does tie in to the presidents in front of you, but especially that era from 1793 to 1900, because there's so much information. There is a deed, for instance, how many counties have a deed? A deed from the 2nd President of the United States to the 6th President of the United States. There's a deed recorded at the Registry of Deeds from John Adams to John Quincy Adams, and John Quincy Adams was John Adams' son. But how many other counties can say they have a deed from certainly one president to another president, never mind one president who is related to the other president and is his son. But the reason why I keep going about the transcription, I think we see more and more of it. People doing historical and genealogical research. And there's just so much information. In fact, you can just find regular deeds, and I go through it, and sometimes they listed everything in that house in 1800. It wasn't just, for $2,000 or for good and sufficient consideration. They listed everything in a house. So it was kind of, to see what got listed in a house in 1800 gives you a sense of history, a sense of information. And also, I also chuckled because there was a deed between two brothers, and it's amazing the descriptions, farmer, this, that, but the brother was taking over, one brother must have had problems and was deeding it over to his brother. and it said, you know, the brother that was getting it was, you know, successful businessman and all that. And then, of course, the other brother would be like Bill O'Donnell. It said insolvent debtor, you know. So sometimes some of the old language they used had a story behind the documents. But for people like yourself that are interested in history, you know, some of those documents, as I say, give you a sense of what was in a house. I know people have done it. You know, I was talking to Jim earlier. You mentioned homes. I know in Norwood there's a very vibrant historical society, and they're doing a lot of work refurbishing an old cemetery, and the records are there. The records are there. They use the registry to see, you know, these names that are on these cemetery stones to try to get a sense of history. People try to do you know, a sense of history of their home. And you don't have to be an attorney to use the records. As a matter of fact, in that green folder, you know, and again, there's a lot of information in there, but also in there is a section on, you know, on how to do research. And again, you know, we had seminars at the registry where things are starting to get better with COVID. So, but here's a handout. It says Norfolk Deeds Computer Assisted Research Guide. We would hand those out at the seminars we would have at the registry. We'd go and teach people how to do research. And a lot of times people said, hey, we took that sheet of paper home and it really helped us, you know. We'd get feedback. So if you say there's no way I could do the research, you can. You know, and this will help you. This sheet, which is on the right side of your green folder, it's called Norfolk Deeds Computer Assisted Research Guide. It can allow you, and also, you know, some of the things we talked about. You know, there's the Homestead Act. We talked about that earlier. But here are the forms. So you know, if you decide that you want to do a homestead, we actually printed the forms, or you could go on our website and download the forms. And one of the reasons why I mentioned that is scams. There was a scam where people were soliciting, telling people they would get you a homestead form for $10. And people, you know, a lot of it was targeting the elderly, and people would write a check for $10 to get a form. Don't pay $10 for a form that you can, you know, take home with you free, or if you know anyone, they can get it free, or, you know, go to an attorney's office. I mean, imagine paying $10 and you just get a blank form, you know. So, you know, people do it. It's unfortunate, but you know, people are like that. As far as the history, again, I think the two presidents, John Adams. I mean, you know, there's information in the blue book. There's information in the green book about him, but some of the principles that were incorporated in the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution really had its roots in John Adams being the intellect that he was. And he was also the drafter of the Massachusetts Constitution. And people don't realize the Massachusetts Constitution, actually, the Declaration of Rights in Massachusetts predates the U.S. Constitution. So a lot of times, again, the lawyer in me who enjoys history, a lot of times something might pass muster under the U.S. Constitution, but the Massachusetts Declaration of Rights, actually, you have more rights, and it gets interpreted a little differently sometimes. Again, that can go back to John Adams. John Quincy Adams, was interesting in of its own right, because, and who knows, it almost looked like things could have gone that way the last election or whatnot. Not to get into that, but he got elected in the U.S. House of Representatives because the Electoral College didn't come up with a majority. So I mean, you know, that doesn't happen all the time, and you know, we can learn from history. And he cut a deal, you know, like any politics, politics being what it is, you know. But he prevailed. So there was no majority of the Electoral College, and I think that was kind of a unique way of getting elected. The interesting thing I would say about John Adams is he got defeated in a close election, even though the Federalists were kind of fighting amongst each other, you know. He got defeated by Thomas Jefferson. And later in life, Jefferson and Adams, although sort of political rivals, would write to each other and wrote to each other. In fact, the story is when John Adams died, he said, "Jefferson lives, Thomas Jefferson lives," not realizing that Thomas Jefferson had died a few hours before at Monticello.
Wow.
And guess what day did they die on? July 4th.
Yeah.
So, you know, but I guess I say, you know, here are political rivals, and again, I mentioned I worked for Congressman Moakley. Those were the days of Tip O'Neill was the Speaker of the House, and I had the privilege of working for, you know, working with Joe Moakley and Tip O'Neill, and Ronald Reagan was the president, but they got things done, you know, and that's what they need to do now. Like the days of, you know, yeah, they battled, but they got things done for the good of the country, and that's what needs to be done. And I was always struck that John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, they have these letters back and forth. In fact, David McCulloch's books use some of what was written. And I was always struck that as bitter rivals as they were, and I mean, it couldn't have been too easy for John Adams, who, you know, to lose to Thomas Jefferson, yet keep, put the politics beside and have a relationship and write to each other, and that went on to the end. So clearly, there are stories behind both John Adams and John Quincy Adams that kind of resonate today. Again, I was very young when John Kennedy was president, but I know my wife's family's from Brookline, and again, John Kennedy meant a lot. I know my grandmother came over here as an immigrant in 1923 from Ireland, and I know that was a big thing. Catholic president, Irish Catholic president, you know, the houses, when they say there was a picture of John Kennedy, I remember that growing up as well at the house. And George Herbert Walker Bush, they had a dedication for him. And as a matter of fact, this is a picture from the dedication. And I don't know, I had another position then, and I was asked to say a few words. I was the chairman of the Norfolk County Commission. So that's a young me there. But I'll tell you what, I felt bad. I hate to say it, I'm a Democrat. I voted against George Herbert Walker Bush, but one of the nicest gentlemen I've ever met. I actually felt bad I voted against him. But where did I go to school? Georgetown University. So the guy that was running against him went to Georgetown University. So so all the things. But I'll tell you, that was something. They had the dedication. He was born in Milton, and they dedicated a plaque there where he was born, and there had to be 1,500 people there, and the energy that was there, and a true gentleman. And again, I always think back, he lost, read my lips, no new taxes, but he raised taxes, but he actually set up the economy so it was better, so that, President Clinton, could balance the budget. So in some ways, he took an action that probably hurt him politically, but in the end, there was balanced budgets back in the 90s. So again, a lot in this history. I don't mean to tie it to the modern era, but I think if we don't learn from history, the history is not going to go too well for any of us. But with that, I hope I really wanted today to really bring the registry. I pride that our internet, through a modern way, brings the registry records into people's homes and businesses through the internet. I wanted to bring what the registry does and some of the consumer issues, like that homestead, like the mortgage discharge, like consumer notification. Bring it out, and if you could spread the word to people that may need it. You may have a niece or a son or a daughter. They're busy working or they're running the children to sporting events, and sometimes the information they may need to protect their home or to make things a little better for them, they're just not aware of, and if you could just you know, pass that information on. And I also hope that again, the information that we have on these boards, and you can see we picked there's 2 boards for the town of Foxborough. You know, in each of the books we did, the one for the 225th anniversary, and again, John Hancock was the person, the first governor that signed the legislation. First governor of Massachusetts, he signed the legislation creating Norfolk County in 1793. But we tried to you know, to pick some people. You know, for instance, Foxborough. We have a little story about Seth and Uriah Boyd, which, you know, here we are, right? The Boyd Library. Yep. There's in Franklin, there was the Horace Mann, abolitionist and education reformer, and we tied it to a deed that they had. So there's some interesting stories in the books, and that's the 2 pictures there. One was in the 225th anniversary, and the other was in the building dedication in 2019. We renovated the Registry of Deeds. There's been actually 4 locations of books at the registry. The registries are always located in Dedham. But I always tell the story. I have 3 children. You're always taking care of your children. The first register, he was a war hero, Captain Elephant Pond, and he was the first register from 1793. Well, from 1793 to 1796, know where he kept it, the registry books?
In his basement.
His dad's house. His dad's house. So you're always taking care of your kids. So they kept it there until the first courthouse got built. And then this building, this is an old kind of picture. This is the current registry. It's across from the Gold Dome Superior Court. This started construction in 1903, was opened in 1905, and we did a renovation in 2019. So in these books, there's, you know, for instance, in Rentham, Ann Sullivan, there was a story about her, an educator. You know, and we did, you know, there was some history. We also did, like, Allie Raisman lived in Needham. So we try to we tied some of it to history. We tied some of it, you know, to sports and education. You know, for instance, in Millis, Christian Herter, he was the governor of Massachusetts, but he was also the United States Secretary of State. So there's some interesting stories, and 2 of the stories we have about Foxborough here, but also the information from the presidents. There is a version of that in the blue book here, and then also a handout in the green book with some of the actual deed references. So if you want to look up the deed in Brookline, you know, Joe Kennedy's name, the president's father, it's right there. You can look up this information. And as I said, I'm always intrigued. You know, I'm always intrigued by, you know, John Adams deeding property to his son, and you know, that was in 1803 in Book 21 at the registry, page 32. So some great history. And again, I think we're lucky to have had 4 presidents here in Norfolk County. And again, I thank you for having me. I hope I brought you a little bit about what the registry's about, and just a little about the little history that we have here in Norfolk County, and I really appreciate it. Yes?
I would like to say I had a personal experience with the registry. You had spoken at the Foxborough Senior Center a number of years ago, and you said that if anybody wanted to look up their deed, they could, your workers were there, and you could do that. So I thought, well, okay, I'll do that. So in their research, there was quite a thing that was discovered. Somebody had stolen some money from basically a forgery, my signature and all, and they took money from my the value of my house, and your people were able to find that for me. Well, and otherwise I never would have known. So I followed up, and it was during the time when all the banks were being changed from one bank to another, and it wound up with the bank that's in the center of town. And anyway, I went to the police chief about it, and he was amazed at what somebody did. They actually forged my signature, and they had a notary sign it, and so there was a notary involved. And so anyway, it got wiped off eventually, and I don't owe any money that they borrowed from my house.
Well, I'm sorry you had to go through the travails, but again, when I mentioned no I in team, I really do believe we have not only the best registry, we have the best registry because we have the best staff, but to hear a story like that they helped you, that makes it all worthwhile. When you know, we preach customer service, and Noel DeBoner from my office is here today. We have the computer here today where if anyone has any questions or needs a copy of their deed, they can do.
What happened, and
yeah.
You know, my children, they wouldn't have known. Maybe, you know, I did do some borrowing or something on that. They wouldn't have known. And but the point is, it was notarized, and it was forgery. That was really
right.
allowed in that situation.
And the good, you know, and again, this is one of the, you know, this is a testimonial sort of to what we talked about a little earlier, the reasons why maybe someone might want to sign up for the Consumer Notification Service. Yeah. You know, you happen to find it because the staff was looking through it. Right. But, you know, in real time, if someone did that, a notice could come in and you'd say, wait, something's not right here. And so you kind of put the face on what I was talking about, because sometimes people are like, that's not going to happen. I mean, you know, honestly, to hear your story, it's sad. I'm sorry you went through it, but it just shows you what's out there. And the good news is, not to, you know, I don't want to panic people, that if someone like forged and then deeded the house out, that you know, by definition is a forgery and cannot convey good title. But it creates a lot of problems and a lot of headaches that you got to go through. But I don't want people, you know, it's just you want to be aware of it, because to me, you know, you know, having something that could affect my credit, or possibly, as you say, a forgery where, you know, someone might deed out my house, even though I have rights and I can fight that. It's just an aggravation that you don't want to go through. But I think it's the time.
Sum of money. That's what was.
Well, they have.
Not the house per se. It was a sum of money that they borrowed from my house.
And you know, part of my, that's what I said, that I may get an email and say, wait a minute, that's a mortgage on my property, but I did not sign that. Yeah. And then here you we should go. I need you to come to all my talks. And as far as what you mentioned about the banks, and they all changed the names, in that green folder, and I know I keep referencing it, there's a lot of information, but one of the documents is, where has my bank gone? This gives you state and local contact information websites, because you know, people forget, in the 1990s some banks went out of business, but a lot of banks have merged, and that was the story I was saying when people were trying to track down and get a mortgage discharge. They're like, where has my bank gone? So this document, where has my bank gone, gives consumers like you resources to try to track down who's holding. You know, I borrowed money from XYZ bank. Where is my bank gone? Where did that? Who's holding my note? So again, you mentioned. I heard you mention that when you were saying it, and I think it's important to reiterate that one of the documents in here, if you ever find yourself trying to track down things, this is a good document. Where has my bank gone, to kind of track down things. Yes.
Thank you so much for making these documents accessible to the general public and readable. That is a fantastic public service that many people can enjoy. As an aside, I just wanted to thank you for bringing up John Adams and Thomas Jefferson with their, even though they might have been political opponents, that they reconciled and they had a friendship. And, you know, it shows, again, Tip O'Neill and President Reagan. Yeah, that's what we need today and in the future. So just as an aside. The other question I had is your computer-assisted research guide. What is really important today, it's like the second largest hobby is genealogy. Gardening was the first one. Now, with genealogy, I'm wondering if there's a type of research or information that can be put together, maybe by the Registry of Deeds and maybe by the New England Genealogical Society, that would focus the research specifically on genealogy and use all the documents at the Norfolk Registry of Deeds as a prototype, because I think that could be extremely important for people. You know, some people are seasoned genealogists, other people are just rookies, but they could go to the registry, go online, and they could really access a lot of information about their families.
Sure, that's good. And as I said, the more we get this on, we're seeing more and more people want to use it for historical and genealogical research. On our website, we have a drop down for historical and genealogical, and have some, again, trying to be more of a resource information, like some links to some of the,
Right.
the powers to be, the real people that know genealogy in those groups. So, but point well taken, and I can only see us getting more and more information out there. But again, thank you for your kind words about it, because as I said, that's what I called it when we were doing the transcription. I called it the History Comes Alive project, and again. Very proud that we were the first in Norfolk County to initiate internet land record research, so people can either come to the registry but do it from the internet. But I'm also, I've got to say, a close second would be, and when a distinguished person like David McCulloch writes you a note, you take note of it. Very proud that we came up with this idea of, and not only an idea. In government you can have ideas, but then nothing gets done. Is actually, getting over 450,000 documents transcribed, so that people can actually, enjoy these documents, and more importantly, learn and enjoy what's in them.
Was that done by humans or done by computer?
You know what? I made a point of doing it by humans. There was a group that they do this like the computer. No, it was done by hand. And ironically, a lot of the documents took on forms. So even though they were handwritten, almost like now, there's forms a lot of times, and it's the lawyers will have forms, and you think each document is separate, but it kind of follows a template. Believe it or not, a lot of the documents, because I would talk to the people that were doing it, they were templates, that they actually could follow the templates. Even though it was handwritten, it was as if someone had a computer form. The name was here. Even though back then they didn't have typewriters, or they didn't have computers that had forms that attorneys pull up and oh, here's the buyer, here's the seller if it's a purchase and sale or a document. But a lot of the documents took on a template. But we did it by long answer to a short question. We did it by hand. And if there's a question, because sometimes you'll see it in the type, they might have a question mark. The one I handed out there weren't any, if I recall. But if there was a doubt, they would, you'll see a little question mark. So yeah, it was done by hand. Well, look, you've been great, and it's always great to come back to Foxborough. And again, I want to thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it, and thanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you.